delighted also to have Peggy and Eric with.
See, the microphone's not working properly.
Oh, well, let's get it working properly.
Is it on for sure?
All right, that's fine.
Turn it off.
Is it on?
I probably don't need it, but turn it on anyway. Oh, all right. Hello. Are you hearing me better?
No.
All right, well, I want everybody to hear.
Where's the other one?
Okay.
That's
We have the same problems in Shoreline. Hello, can you hear me now? All right. Well, I'm Darrell, and I'm here because of Beth Wilson's daughter, Lily, who met us over at Shoreline and told her mom, why don't you invite Darrell to preach? And I'm delighted to have Peggy and Eric with me today to support our theme of thinking about Jesus of Galilee. So I'm going to tell you a story first that leads into what I want to say about Jesus. Hazel died, but she didn't pass away. She came back. Within days, her husband of 64 years, Magnus, saw her again. She was sitting at the kitchen table, and an angel stood on either side. And then she was gone. Sometimes she would come into the bedroom. Sometimes he would rise to get closer, and she was gone. For 6 years, she came back. She followed him during moves to 2 different apartments, standing in the room, sitting on the couch, looking in the doorway, looking in the window. Sometimes she would come right through the wall. One winter, he became quite concerned because he saw her standing outside in the freezing wind without a coat. He went out to bring her in, and she was gone. Bereavement hallucinations are a normal reaction to the death of a beloved one. And studies in some cultural contexts report that as many as 30 to 60% of the folks in those cultural settings report having seen someone who has died. Jesus came back too. And Easter wasn't one morning 4 weeks ago. It lasted for years. His earliest admirers saw him, beginning with Mary of Magdala, then Peter, and others. The authority of an apostle in the early days came from a vision. And years later, a Pharisaic Jew, Saul of Tarsus, schooled in Stoic philosophy with a philosophical understanding of his Jewish religion, confessed, and I quote, "Last of all, as if appearing to an aborted fetus of a man, a murderer, an assassin, he was seen by me. But by then, we are talking about a different kind of vision." And 4 weeks ago, when you celebrated Easter here, over 2 billion people, almost a third of the population of this entire planet, heard a human voice proclaim, "He is risen." And they answered with a thunderous roar, "He is risen indeed." And they were affirming the visions of his first followers. Scientists are still working on theories to explain hallucinations of dear ones. But 2 elements are important: love and desire. People see because they love. People see because they want to. And as Freud said about all religion, it is founded in desire. But who was this man, and why did they love him and desire to see him live? We know almost nothing about him and his life. What we have are a few footprints and a few voice prints. The rest are things said by later followers, legends, and myth. Things said are legends. And the truth of every religious world, including the truth of ours, is a myth. Absolute truth to those on the inside, but not quite so to those on the outside. But we know he was a peasant in the region of Galilee in the Roman Empire, born and raised in the village of Nazareth, not Bethlehem. That was a later story to make an ancient prophecy come true. He was born just a couple of miles from the bustling city of Sepphoris, and he might have worked there as a young man, perhaps as a day laborer, depending on wages for a day to eat his bread. He was born sometime before the death of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BCE, if we can take any of the stories seriously. And he died before the end of Pilate's governorship in Palestine, which ended in 36, by state terrorism in a hideous lynching. That's all I'm going to say about footprints. When you walk on water, it's hard to find footprints. Jesus was an Israelite. I wouldn't define him as a Judean, or the English term Jew, because of the many problems he had with Judeans in the south and their religious world. By this time in the history of religion, people had figured out that they might have a better future than the oldsters had dreamed of. The Sadducees, who ran the temple system in Jerusalem, told you that when you died, you became a shade in the netherworld of Sheol, somewhere underneath the ground. Not a great future. But with Greek philosophy and the widening ideas that came from the Greeks, some people began to think, oh, you might be able to live like the gods do. You could live forever. And once ideas like that get into the Mississippi of world religion, you never know what's going to flow, because you take anything out of the river that you want to create your new religious worlds. So one day, a man came up to Jesus and asked, what can I do to live forever? And Jesus answers, love goodness with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor, everywhere, as yourself. Now, he said it better than a lot of the rabbis and others said it at his time. But neighbor for Jesus included enemies. And the man says, oh, well, I've been doing that all my life. So Jesus answered, well, if you want to make sure you'll get there, go. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor, to those who need it most. And come follow me, and we'll build a new empire together. An empire of the good and goodness. That's the concern of the peasants at the bottom of the Roman Empire. A settler colonial empire. And settler colonial empires work the same, whether it's ancient Rome or the empires of Europe that spread around the globe, or even the American empire today. You invade a land, you take over where the indigenous people live, you kill as many as you have to until you pacify them all. And you rewrite the rules so that they favor you economically, and socially, and politically. And you take away all the rights that they had as human beings. You know where that's going on all around the globe today. That was the Roman Empire. And Jesus was a peasant. He was an indigenous person at the bottom of the whole patronage system. Now, when Jesus said, go sell everything, loving goodness with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving your neighbor as yourself, someone here or some folks here this morning who've heard the story before might ask, aren't you leaving out something in the translation? Haven't you left out metaphysics? No, I didn't. Didn't you hear the metaphysics? Jesus, that I'm speaking about this morning, is specifically a Jesus for everyone, whether you're an atheist, and Unitarian churches usually have a quarter to a third, sometimes it's half, or whether you're one of them, all kinds of theism. So I'm going to translate those sayings of Jesus into a different metaphysics. But the empire of goodness was the theme of the core of Jesus' stories and parables. It's the way we can hear some voice prints. That was the main voice print of this peasant. Some of the stories about the kingdom or the empire of goodness are made up by later followers. And scholars spend a lot of time, and they disagree with each other all the time, on what might have been the original voice print. So I can't guarantee every voice print this morning. But I can say that most of what I say would be backed up by many scholars in the field who specialize in that area. The stories about the empire of goodness that Jesus told are unlike anything else that we find in antiquity. They come from a particular voice and vision of reality, and there's nothing like them in the Greco-Roman world, or even in later rabbinic stories that we can trace 200 years later. So what does the empire of goodness look like? What does the empire of goodness remind me of? Jesus often questioned in his stories. Well, let's start with the empire of goodness is like a weed. This mustard plant, about 2 feet tall off the ground. The empire of goodness is like a mustard seed that someone tossed in his garden. It grew and became a tree, and all the birds of the air nested in its branches. Well, mustard trees are usually just 2 feet tall. But the phrase, all the birds of the sky nested in its branches, is quoting other stories in oral culture of empire. These stories of empire use the mighty cedar of Lebanon as a symbol of great empires of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and the hopes of Israel. In all of them, quote, all the birds of the sky nested in the branches of a mighty towering cedar of Lebanon, an enormous tree, and the Roman Empire was that cedar. So Jesus says, in a burlesque of that story, the empire of goodness is like a weed, a mustard seed that someone took and tossed in his garden. The purity codes of Israel said you could only plant one kind of plant in your garden. So in an Israelite garden, according to the purity code, you don't toss mustard seeds in your garden. You could grow a mustard seed in a small plot and then be careful. You didn't toss it in a garden. It was a weed. It would take over the whole place. And that's that's the point of the story. But Jesus says, no matter. Forget the purity code. Just take a little goodness, regardless of how it looks according to codes, and toss it in your garden. It'll take over everything. And Peggy told that story to the children this morning. You think it will just grow into a fragile little plant a few inches tall? No. Metaphorically, at least, it'll be a mighty tree, and all the birds of the sky will nest in its branches. That is Jesus in a burlesque of a mighty tree of power and violence and commerce in the empires of this world. And he's asking a question. Are you hitching your hopes on systems of power and violence, on national ideology, on economic domination and exploitation? Don't bet on it, says Jesus. Pin your passion to a weed. Well, not the weed that's popular in Washington right now. That weed. How does good ultimately triumph in the world? Jesus says, pick your planet. Where is the empire of Rome? And where is the empire of Jesus? And where is the empire of goodness? Now, some of the stories of Jesus, which are coming from the peasant side of society, are stories of resistance. And they're misunderstood when they cross cultural into ours. Resistance is a great theme for us today in our culture as well, as it was for Jesus and his. And three of his sayings on this theme are strung together, although he might have said them in different ways, and they're all about resistance to oppression and injustice. And here they are. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not respond to an evil person with violence. John Lewis, as you cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If anyone sues you in court of law and takes away your cloak, let him have your tunic as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. Now, we don't understand those sayings because that they were said in a different cultural setting. And here's why. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the left. Culturally, if anyone struck you on the right cheek, it would have to be a backhand if they were right-handed. That's a strike of insult. It's the hit and the slap of a master to a servant, of a husband to a wife who is property, of a parent to a child. But a peasant resistance is, turn the other one. If you're a man and you want to strike me as a man and an equal, go ahead. That's resistance on a peasant level. If anyone sues you in court of law and takes away your cloak, let him have your tunic as well. How does that translate? Give the shirt off your back to your fellow person? No. No, it doesn't understand the culture. You had a cloak that kept you warm and you slept in at night. And then you had a basic tunic that was what you wore every day all the time. So you owe something to this rich person who's coming to sue you in court. And he's going to take away your cloak of a poor peasant. Take off your tunic and give it to him as well. And what are you going to be standing in? There's no Munsing wearer. There's no someone who's got their hands on you. There's no Victoria's Secret underneath there. You're naked. And the shame of nakedness was not appearing naked, but it was seeing a naked person in public. So shame that person in public. That's resistance of a peasant level. And if he doesn't take your tunic and he walks out with your cloak, just follow him down the street. He took my cloak. Naked, of course. He took my cloak. He took my cloak. What kind of a person is this? Who does this to a poor person? That's what that saying means in antiquity. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. That's not being nice to the Roman soldiers. That's how to stand up as a person of dignity in the under Roman oppression. Because the law said that a soldier could take you 1 mile and no more. And the soldier knew that if you went more than a mile, he was in trouble with his centurion, and you never knew what the punishment was going to be. So just imagine a Roman soldier after 1 mile saying to the peasant, "Oh no, let me carry my pack. Oh no, I'm going 2 miles." Taking the pack off of a peasant. That's resistance. Now, I have digested a sermon about Jesus from a whole semester of courses, of a course, and I've digested it to an hour and a half, so I'm just going to have to skip a few things here, and my time is up, I can see by the clock. And so I'm going to close with the rest of the story. My father, Magnus, mourned his beloved Hazel gently. He healed softly over the years, and the times we spent together talking about his feelings for Mom, the many years that we had shared, and his recurring visions of her. Sometimes he would ask about why he was seeing her, and we would compare notes. My brother and I would sometimes go into the science of hallucinations, and Dad would listen attentively. But he had his own theory, and he didn't change it in 11 years. He was seeing her in her spirit body. She continued to live in another dimension, in the loving embrace of her Savior and living Lord, in a realm beyond everyday realities of time and space and matter. The subject came up again 3 years ago. He hadn't seen Mom for 2 years. It came up, but with a different question. Where is Mama now? And I thought for a moment, remembering the countless years of my longing that we could share the same religious world, that he could share my knowledge of Jesus as I had shared his. And I thought, now is not the time to compare worldviews. We will never build the religious world we can share. And I answered, she's in heaven. She's with Grandma and Auntie Margaret and Grandpa. And Dad, you will be there too. We sat in quiet tenderness, our minds and emotions united in deep respect and love. A man of hope and a man with another hope, having different pictures of ultimate reality in a realm beyond blasphemy and prayers, where heaven means 2 very different things, but a realm where we are joined in our common humanity and our longing for what is true and what is good and what is beautiful and what is worthwhile. Today we celebrate one solitary life of a simple Galilean peasant who once said, "Come to me, for my yoke is a good man, and my authority is a gentle man." We celebrate today as those with hope, with those of many different hopes, with different pictures of ultimate reality, in a realm beyond blasphemy and prayers, where we are joined in a common human bond of fighting hatred and violence and bigotry, where we are in a realm where the empire of Jesus springs to life in the world in acts of solidarity with the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrants, the wounded, the neglected, in courageous acts that seek justice on behalf of oppressed. Some say Jesus is risen. We have seen, we have heard. And whatever you think about it, hear these metaphors. The empire of Jesus is still rising. It rises in deeds. And may the force be with you.